She was 10 minutes late. And even now, as I stared at her signature on the resume in front of me, I still couldn't decide whether this was some kind of cosmic joke or punishment. Tessa, her name sat printed in bold Helvetica. Top center. The name I used to write on Christmas tags, emergency contact forms, and in my will. The name that sat beside mine on the divorce decree like an afterthought. She was sitting right there across from me right now, adjusting her blazer, flipping her hair, apologizing for traffic, like I didn't know she always left late and blamed everyone else. Still performing, still polished, still so unaware. She didn't recognize me. Not even a flicker of hesitation in her eyes when I called her in. Maybe it was the glasses. Maybe it was the fact that I wasn't slouched in a cardigan with coffee stains anymore. Maybe time had scrubbed me clean from her memory. But I knew her. Every nervous breath, every glance toward the window when she was pretending to think, every carefully chosen word, curated, softened, professional. She was interviewing for a project manager role, one that required stability, humility, and communication. I almost laughed. The pen in my hand shook. I gripped it tighter and focused on the page. I needed to hold it together. Just long enough to get through this meeting, just long enough to not fall apart in front of her again. "Tell me about a time you had to rebuild trust with a client," I said, not looking up. The irony stung like vinegar in an open cut. She smiled, tilted her head. Her voice didn't shake at all. "That's a great question," she said. Of course, she said that. She always said that when she needed time to lie. I wasn't sure which part of me hated her more. The one that remembered her cheating, or the one that still wanted her to recognize me. I asked her questions, generic ones, bullet point prompts I didn't even care about. I nodded. I wrote fake notes. She kept talking like this was a normal interview, like we weren't two people who used to sleep under the same roof. She never looked twice. I started to wonder if maybe this was the final insult, that I could be 3 feet away from her and still invisible. When the interview ended, she reached to shake my hand. "Thank you so much," she said, eyes bright, hopeful. "It would mean a lot to me to work somewhere that feels grounded." Grounded. The woman who once left me on a Sunday morning with a voicemail saying she was emotionally untethered was now here begging for a steady paycheck. I stood up. I didn't take her hand. Instead, I said just one word: approved. She blinked. "Wait, really?" I nodded. "You'll hear from HR by Monday." I walked her to the door, my throat tight. I waited for her to pause, to turn to say something that hinted at recognition. Nothing. She left and I stood there, heart thudding against my ribs, wondering how it felt to become a ghost in someone's life, while they were still alive in yours. Monday came. I thought maybe she'd back out. Maybe the memory would click into place over the weekend, and she'd withdraw her application out of embarrassment or guilt or shame. But no. At exactly 8:53 a.m., she walked through the office doors with the same confident stride I used to watch disappear down the hallway of our old apartment every time we fought. I watched her from my office window. She greeted the front desk associate like she'd been rehearsing it in her head for days. Smiled with just enough warmth to be memorable, but not so much that it felt desperate. Tessa had always been a master at first impressions. She just never cared much about what came after. She was assigned to the operations pod 2 floors down. That should have been the end of it. Technically, we wouldn't need to interact much, but I couldn't stop checking the internal dashboard. Watching her calendar fill up with onboarding meetings, Slack pings from her new manager, and lunch breaks marked as solo. It felt surreal. This person, once the center of my entire emotional world, was now just a floating profile icon in a sea of coworkers. An entry in our system, a head count. On Wednesday, something odd happened. It reached out about a device login issue. Apparently, Tessa had tried to access one of the older archive folders from 5 years ago, a storage directory that hadn't been used in ages. It was flagged because those permissions were legacy only and restricted. I approved the ticket without saying anything. But my curiosity went into overdrive. Why would she be poking around in that? Later that afternoon, I saw her in the hallway by the break room. She had a notebook pressed to her chest and was speaking with Alex from HR. I lingered by the vending machine pretending to care about trail mix, but really just eavesdropping. "I used to know someone who worked here," she said casually. "A long time ago. I thought maybe there'd still be some old files." Alex smiled politely, clueless. "Could be. But most of that stuff was cleared years back." She nodded and walked away. It wasn't the words that got to me. It was the way she said "used to know someone," like it was a footnote. Like the 7 years of marriage had been some footpath she detoured off of and forgot to circle back to. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out the old binder, the one I had kept tucked under my bed since the divorce, full of the little betrayals, receipts, screenshots, that email where she accidentally forwarded me a dinner reservation meant for Evan, the hotel invoice she pretended didn't exist, and worst of all, her message to him 3 days before she left me. "Once this is over, I'll finally breathe again." I stared at that line for hours. And yet, she had the audacity to sit in this building sipping coffee from a company mug like she wasn't made of fractures. By Friday, I couldn't help myself. I scheduled a one-on-one with her under the guise of project performance alignment. Corporate buzzwords, easy to justify. She accepted the invite within minutes. She walked into my office with that same smooth glide, the one she used to have when she wore those heels I bought her for our 3rd anniversary. She didn't recognize the room. Or me. Not yet. I gestured to the chair. "How's your first week going?" She smiled, crossing her legs with measured poise. "Busy, but good. Honestly, this place has a different energy. I like it." I leaned back, steepling my fingers. "That's great to hear. I hope nothing has felt familiar." She tilted her head. Familiar. There it was, the first crack, the faintest flicker behind her eyes. A pause, but she blinked it away. "I meant familiar like déjà vu," I clarified, smiling like it was all a joke. "You know, sometimes old places have echoes." She nodded slowly. "No, nothing like that. I mean, maybe the name sounded familiar, but I wasn't sure from where." She still didn't know. She didn't remember the late nights I spent curled on the bathroom floor, clutching a toothbrush and trying not to scream. She didn't remember the ring she left behind in the freezer of all places. She didn't remember who had loved her enough to forgive the first lie and the second. She didn't remember me. But I remembered everything. And I wasn't sure what terrified me more. The idea that she truly forgot or that she remembered perfectly and simply didn't care. I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew. Not everything, not who I was, but something. Some vague discomfort in her bones that made her restless in her chair during our meeting. The way she kept touching her bracelet. Tessa used to do that when she lied. A tiny nervous tic disguised as elegance. And as I watched her walk away that day, I felt it in my gut. She wasn't just here for the job. She was looking for something. Something buried. Something she thought might still exist inside this company. So I started digging too. We don't delete everything after employees leave, at least not immediately. Most project logs and correspondence archives end up in cold storage. Old emails, flagged messages, client folders that haven't been touched in years. Most of it useless. But some of it, well, some of it is where the ghosts live. I spent a few hours that night, long after the building had gone quiet, going through her name in our digital archive. Not the new application file, but anything that might tie her to our firm before this. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. I told myself it was just curiosity closure. But part of me knew that if I kept scratching at this, I might dig up something worse than the silence. And then I found it. A file buried under a folder labeled Q3 Client Transfers Legacy Notes. Inside it was a project timeline from 6 years ago, back when I was still in my old firm, long before I joined this company. In there, under the vendor section, was an events firm listed under her name. She had worked with this company before as a contractor, not long before she left me, which meant she lied back then too. She told me she'd never heard of it. She said she was starting from scratch, that the new guy she met wasn't related to work at all. And there, at the bottom of the document, was a name I hadn't seen in years. Evan Nichols, external lead, assigned to the project by her company, the same man she left me for. I leaned back in my chair. My palms were clammy, the air thick. It hit me all at once. She didn't stumble into this job accidentally. She applied here because this place meant something. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was desperation. But either way, she was tracing her past, hunting for pieces, and that made her dangerous, not just to me, but to herself. The next morning, I took the stairs instead of the elevator. I needed time to think. I passed her on the second floor. She didn't notice me. She was holding a printout and walking quickly toward the storage room. I followed at a distance, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. When I peeked through the door, she was alone, kneeling on the floor, going through a dusty file box. She didn't even look around, just kept flipping until she found a thin blue folder. She opened it slowly, stared for a long moment, then smiled, not joyfully, but with a kind of twisted relief, like someone had confirmed a suspicion they buried a long time ago. I slipped away before she saw me. Later that day, I went to that room. The folder was gone, but the box was still there, and there was one thing left at the very bottom. A name badge, mine from years ago, my full name printed in faded black marker. Howard Callan. It must have fallen in there by mistake during the last office move. But somehow she'd seen it, and she didn't say anything, which meant she remembered. She'd remembered the entire time, and now she was playing a game I didn't know the rules to. The following Monday, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The air was cold, the kind of cold that clings to your shirt cuffs and makes your hands feel smaller than they are. I stood outside my office door for a moment longer than necessary, unsure of why I felt that same tightness in my chest I used to get back when Tessa and I lived together. That lingering, invisible tension that something was wrong, but unspoken. Quiet hostility wrapped in silence. When I opened the door, I noticed it immediately. There was a yellow sticky note on my desk. I never use sticky notes. I hate them. Too easy to lose, too messy, too exposed. But this one was right in the middle of my otherwise pristine workspace. 2 words, block letters, no name, still here. At first, I assumed someone had meant it as a joke. We'd had a minor server outage last Friday, and maybe someone from it thought it was funny. But the handwriting stopped me cold. It was hers. Tessa used to write block letters in all caps. She said cursive felt too dramatic and printed everything like she was labeling jars in a kitchen. and I knew without a doubt that she'd written it. She had been in my office. She had touched my desk. And now it wasn't a matter of if she remembered me. It was what game she was playing. That same day I saw her walking past the main stairwell. She didn't look at me, not directly, but she paused just slightly as we crossed paths. Enough for me to notice she was wearing the same earrings she wore on our honeymoon. I remember those earrings because I'd spent half a paycheck on them. I remembered her crying when I gave them to her, and I remembered her leaving them behind in the kitchen drawer when she moved out, telling me she didn't need to be reminded of who she used to be. But now they were back, just like her. That night, I stayed behind again under the pretense of cleaning up end-of-quarter paperwork. In truth, I was watching the hallway through the reflection of my darkened office window. At 7:41 p.m., Tessa appeared alone. She went into conference room C and didn't close the door all the way. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. I stood in the doorway and watched. She was looking at the framed photo on the wall, an old black and white picture of our company's founders. Most people walked past it without a second glance, but she stared at it like it was a painting in a museum. I cleared my throat and she turned. "Didn't mean to intrude," I said. Her expression didn't flinch. "You're not." We stood there in that strange silence, the kind you can only share with someone who once knew what your morning breath smelled like. Then she said it. "I used to know someone who worked here a long time ago. Is that why you came back?" Her lips tightened. She didn't answer right away, just folded her arms and nodded toward the photo. "It's strange. This place hasn't changed much, but I have." I couldn't stop myself. "Have you?" She looked at me then. "Really?" Looked at me. And in that moment, something passed between us that didn't have a name. Something old and unresolved and sharp around the edges. "I came here for a reason," she said quietly. But I didn't expect this. I wanted to ask what this meant. I wanted to shout. I wanted to demand why she pretended not to know me. Why she left that note. Why she was wearing those earrings. Why she could act like our history was just a shadow passing by the water cooler. But all I said was, "This job, you're doing well at it." She tilted her head. "You think I don't know who you are?" I froze. She smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just knowingly. "I knew the moment I saw you. I just wanted to see how long you'd hide." Then she walked past me slow and deliberate, like she had just handed me a secret and wanted to watch it burn in my hands. I didn't sleep that night because now I wasn't just dealing with the woman who broke me. I was dealing with a version of her I didn't recognize, and I was starting to wonder if I had ever really known her at all. I told myself I wouldn't check her workspace. That would have crossed a line, right? That would have made me the petty one, the haunted ex, the man who couldn't let go. But I crossed that line anyway. I waited until Friday afternoon when Tessa left the building early for a client meeting. I watched her Uber icon pull away from the curb through the office security feed. And then I walked down to her floor like it was just another audit review. I didn't need to break into anything. That was the strangest part. Her desk drawer wasn't even locked. Inside was a folder, not thick, not marked, just cream-colored cardstock with no labels, no tabs, like it was meant to hide in plain sight. I opened it, expecting I don't even know, maybe old resumes, client briefs, office gossip. But what I found made my breath stop halfway in my chest. There were only 3 items inside. First, a photo, one I hadn't seen in years. Us, me and Tessa, sitting on the front porch of our old apartment building, I was holding a coffee mug in one hand and a book in the other. She had her legs across my lap, laughing at something I must have said. I remember the exact moment. A neighbor had just yelled at his dog for peeing on the steps and had made some dumb pun about leashes and democracy. She laughed so hard she snorted. I hadn't seen that smile since before she started vanishing on weekends. The second item was a folded napkin. I recognized it immediately. Printed with the name Barlatus, the little jazz bar we used to sneak into after work. We had our last good night there before it all fell apart. The napkin had a message written on it in her handwriting. You never finished that song. It was true. I'd once promised to write her a song on guitar for her birthday. I got halfway through and stopped. I said it didn't sound right. The truth was, I was afraid it wouldn't be good enough. The third item was a copy of a resignation letter drafted and signed, dated next Friday. A letter to HR stating that she'd like to terminate her contract at the end of the month due to personal clarity. Clarity. What the hell was happening? This wasn't the behavior of a woman climbing a career ladder. This was the behavior of someone on a pilgrimage. She didn't come here just for the job. She came to dig up something that belonged to both of us, and maybe, just maybe, she came to bury it properly. That night, I stayed late again, walking empty corridors like a ghost haunting my own life. I sat at the edge of the stairwell and stared at the office parking lot lights flickering on the rain-slick pavement. I felt the weight of those three items in my mind, the photo, the napkin, the letter, like they were pieces of a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. And then I got the email from a company address. No subject, no body, just one attachment, an audio file. I stared at it for 10 minutes before playing it. It was a voice memo recorded recently. Tessa's voice, quiet, unsteady, like she was speaking to no one or everyone. I didn't come here to be forgiven, she said. I didn't come here to apologize either. I needed to stand in the place where everything broke. I needed to see what I left behind, and I needed to know if it was still standing. Click. End of message. No name. No timestamp. No explanation. Just her voice echoing through my headphones like a ghost whispering in a church. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know if I wanted answers anymore. Because what if the truth, the one she was finally ready to give me, was something I couldn't carry? I didn't reply to the audio message. I didn't even mention it when I saw her the next morning. But it stayed in my head like a ticking sound you can't locate in your car. Soft enough to ignore, but steady enough to drive you crazy. I watched her that day, not from the shadows, not like a spy, but openly like someone watching the last leaf on a tree just before winter. She moved slower. She spoke less. She stared at screens longer than necessary, like her thoughts were somewhere far from the task at hand. That afternoon, I walked into the quiet corridor between the West conference rooms and waited. When she turned the corner, she almost walked right past me. I got your message, I said. She stopped. I didn't send it, she replied, her voice low, guarded. I raised an eyebrow, but it was your voice. She looked at the floor. I recorded it. Yes, but I didn't send it. I saved it in drafts. Maybe I left my screen unlocked. Maybe someone found it and hit send. Or maybe I said carefully, you wanted me to hear it, but couldn't make yourself hit the button. She didn't argue. That silence between us was louder than anything either of us could have said. I want to ask you something, I said, and I want the truth this time. No metaphor, no careful answers. She nodded slowly. Okay. Why did you come here? Tessa sighed. Not a dramatic sigh, a quiet one. The kind you let out when you finally stop pretending you're fine. I came here because I found something, she said. After the divorce, a few months later, she reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper folded in quarters. It was yellowed at the edges like it had been tucked away for years. She handed it to me. It was a receipt. My handwriting, 2 coffees, 1 pastry, a short note scrolled along the bottom. Save this. One day you'll need to remember what we were like before everything cracked. I stared at it, my mind racing. I remembered writing that vaguely. It was from a day when we were still pretending to be okay. The day after our worst fight. I had bought us breakfast and left her the note in the brown paper bag. I never asked if she'd seen it. She never said a word about it. I found it in a book, she whispered. It fell out when I was moving. And I sat on the floor and cried for 2 hours because I realized I couldn't remember what we were like before it cracked. There was a pause. I thought coming here might remind me, she said. But this place didn't mean anything to you back then, I said. That's what I thought too, she replied. Until I found something else. She pulled up a photo on her phone. It was of me standing in front of this very building years ago, holding a box of documents. I was smiling. She had taken the photo from the car, probably while dropping me off. I never knew she'd kept it. I drove past this building every few months after we split, she said. Sometimes I'd park and just sit. I think part of me knew you'd be here someday. I just didn't think it would hurt this much to see you. Then why not just say it? I asked, my voice more bitter than I wanted. Why the guessing game? Why pretend not to know me? Why notes and memos and earrings from our honeymoon? She closed her eyes for a long second. Because I didn't want you to forgive me. I blinked. What? I didn't want you to say it's okay. Just to make peace. I didn't want to be another thing you fixed. I wanted to see what was left when I didn't ask for anything. I stared at her, heart thudding, mouth dry, because it wasn't just regret in her voice. It was something else. Something heavier. She took a step closer. Howard, I never told you the full truth about why I left. About why I ran from everything so suddenly. I swallowed because of Evan. She shook her head. No, that was the excuse. Then she reached into her bag again, and this time pulled out a small envelope, unsealed, handwritten. My name on the front. It was supposed to be a letter back then. I was going to leave it for you, but I couldn't. And now you need to read it before you decide what to do next. She pressed it into my hand and walked away, without another word. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. And what was inside was not what I expected. Not even close. I didn't open the envelope right away. Not even after I got home. I placed it on the kitchen counter like it was something fragile, like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. I paced the apartment, washed a dish I didn't need to wash, opened the fridge twice without taking anything out. That envelope sat there, daring me to care again. When I finally opened it, the paper inside was creased and uneven. Her handwriting was messier than I remembered, like she had written it in a single breath. Howard, if you're reading this, then I never got brave enough to say any of it to your face. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I didn't know how to carry the guilt anymore. I didn't know how to stay with someone who kept loving me when I was falling apart and didn't have the language to say so. Evan wasn't some passionate escape. He was a distraction. He paid attention to the version of me that looked fun on the outside. You saw the rest, the broken pieces, the version that didn't know how to be happy without an audience. Do you remember the night we found out I couldn't carry to term? That night, you brought me soup and told me we could try again. I smiled. I nodded. And then I felt like a stranger in my own body. You were planning our future. I was still grieving when you didn't even know I'd already lost. I never told you about the second miscarriage. It happened before I even confirmed it with a doctor. I kept working through it. I told myself it didn't count if I didn't speak it out loud. That's when I started going numb. That's when I started vanishing from our life. I didn't cheat on you out of lust. I cheated because I wanted to be someone else just for a moment. Someone who wasn't surrounded by reminders of what she couldn't become. I kept everything inside. I let it rot there. And when I finally broke, you were the one who had to watch me collapse in slow motion. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know the truth before you turned that page for good. Because it matters. Even now, even if we're just two people on opposite sides of a glass wall, Tessa. I read it twice, then a third time, and for the first time in years, the anger didn't show up. Not because I was ready to absolve her, but because something shifted, like the ground beneath the story I've been standing on had subtly tilted. What I thought had been betrayal wasn't simple anymore. It was layered in things I never saw. Grief I never heard. Pain she never trusted me with. And maybe that was the real break. Not the affair, not the lies, not the running, but the silence. The next morning at work, she wasn't at her desk. Her laptop sat open, her coffee still steaming, but she was gone. I checked the schedule. No meetings. I called her work extension, voicemail. For a moment, I thought she'd left again. Another vanishing act. But then I saw her sitting alone in conference room B, staring out the window. She didn't turn when I entered. She just said, "Did you read it?" I nodded. My throat felt thick. "I wanted to hate you," I said quietly. For years I wanted that to be easy. And now I don't know. I'm tired of being right about the version of you I made up just to stay angry. She turned to me slowly. Her eyes were wet but not broken. She looked like someone who had spent a very long time in the dark and was just now letting her eyes adjust to daylight. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "But I owed you that letter. I should have given it to you 5 years ago. You didn't think I could handle the truth back then?" "No, I didn't think I could." We sat in silence for what felt like an hour. Then she asked, "So, what happens now?" And I realized I didn't have an answer. Because this wasn't about restarting something. This was about facing the wreckage and deciding whether we had the courage to stand in it together for one more minute before walking away, or if we'd simply close the door and never look back. But the truth, that decision wasn't just mine anymore. We didn't speak again for 3 days. She came into the office, did her job, made polite conversation with the team, smiled when appropriate, and avoided me. Not out of malice, not out of fear, but because I think she knew I needed space, and because she finally understood that healing doesn't arrive on command. It creeps in quietly when no one's watching. During those 3 days, I kept the letter in my drawer. I read it once more, not to analyze, not to dissect, just to feel what it meant, not what it cost. I started to realize that the version of Tessa I'd been angry at all these years was never real. It was a frozen sculpture of resentment I'd built in my head just to stay upright, because rage is easier to carry than grief, especially when you never get to say goodbye properly. But now I had the goodbye. And strangely, I didn't want to use it. Friday evening, the office was empty again. Another end of another week. The windows reflected the first hints of sunset. I saw her walking toward the elevator, her bag on her shoulder. She didn't see me standing near the break room until I stepped forward. Tessa. She paused. I held up my coffee mug. I don't have an answer for you, but I have 15 minutes and 2 chairs in conference room C. You want to sit and just talk? She looked at me, tired, but soft. I'd like that. We sat down with nothing between us but a stale cookie someone had left behind and the quiet hum of an old HVAC vent. She crossed her legs. I folded my hands. Neither of us knew where to start, but that was okay. It was the kind of silence that felt like a beginning, not an ending. I don't think we could ever go back to who we were, I said after a while. I wouldn't want to, she replied. That version of us was built on too many unspoken things. But I'm not angry anymore, I said. She smiled faintly. That's more than I deserve. Maybe. I nodded. But it's what you got. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, the same one she'd kept on her first day at the job. She slid it across the table. I opened it. Inside, page after page of notes, and in the back, a song, my unfinished song. She had copied the lyrics I'd left behind years ago, the ones I'd given up on writing, and filled in the ending herself. You remembered? I whispered. I never forgot, she said. We didn't kiss. We didn't hug. We didn't promise anything. But as we walked out of that building together, 2 people no longer hiding, no longer spinning narratives to protect themselves, I realized something important. We weren't repairing something broken. We were building something new. A friendship, a respect, a strange, fragile peace that didn't erase the past, but didn't let it dictate the future either. 2 weeks later, she submitted her resignation officially this time. No hidden letters, no dramatics. She told the team she was moving on, and she meant it. But before she left, she handed me a coffee. No note, just a quiet smile. And as she stepped into the elevator for the last time, she turned and said, "Next time you finish a song, let someone hear it." I nodded. Next time.